All right. Testing, testing. Let me check my volume real quick. Let me check my volume real quick, Akiam. Testing, testing. All right. All right, Shalom. First and foremost, want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, Ba'ashem Makakodash. Double honors to the utters and apostles of Great Millstone that taught us this truth. And Shalom to the hopeful elect. All right, the Yakim and the Akwaf scattered around the four corners of the planet Earth that have returned to the obedience of the scriptures through the true names of Yahweh Yahushua and the true doctrine. I'm the brother Iraq, all right, from GMS Dallas. And I wanted to do a lesson real quick through the spirit going into this particular topic. All right. And basically, what we're going to be going into is mercy. All right. The necessity of mercy during this grace period. All right. Because mercy, okay, is that key ingredient, one of the key ingredients, that we need in order to make it, to the kingdom, to salvation. All right. And being here in Babylon the Great, all right, being under the curses, all right, being without sovereignty, being without a priesthood, all right, access to a physical temple, um, mercy and grace was going to be the only way that we would be allowed back into the good graces of Yahweh Shem Yahushua. All right, and that is being administered through Yahushua, himself. All right, our high priest in the heavens. Okay, so this is going to be a quick hit through the spirit, but I wanted to bring out a few precepts that land back on that idea. All right, so I'm going to start here in Lamentations chapter 3 and verse 22. All right, and it says, I'm going to start at verse 21. It says, "This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not." All right. So I'm gonna get this in the blue letter real quick. Let's transition to the blue letter on that. All right, and get some of these words. Okay, this is Lamentations chapter 3 and verse 22. I'm gonna read it again. It says, "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not." All right, now let's get this word mercies. All right, chasad. Strong's H2617. It says goodness, kindness, faithfulness. All right, favor, pity, reproach. All right. Okay. It says reproof, beauty, favor. Okay, let's see. All right. Now I want to highlight one of these words that came out, and one of the word that it pulled up was faithfulness, right? Because ultimately it was predestined from the foundation of the earth that we would get to this point. You know, like when the Lord chose Abraham, for example, um, while he was in the house of his father, who was an idol worshiper, all right, while he was uncircumcised, the Lord chose Abraham based off of the faith that he had. Okay, and fast forward into these times today, all right, the Lord is dealing with us due to the faith that we have. All right, but the Lord, Yahweh Shemel Shai has also been true to his word. He's been true to his word. The prophecies are right on schedule. Okay, and one of the prophecies, um, there's a few prophecies to where, the Lord promised that he would, have mercy on us in these times today. And a matter of fact, let me see if I can find that real quick. I want to say it's in the book of Isaiah. All right. This is, Yeah, there's a couple. Okay, let's get this. This is Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 7. All right, and we're going to actually read up on this too and get verse 3. So I'm going to read verse 7 and then I'm going to jump up. It says, "Let the wicked forsake his way and the unrighteous man his thoughts." All right, and when it talks about the wicked and the unrighteous in this scripture, this is really going into us. Um, us when we were in this, when we were in that Gentile state of mind. All right, us before we return to the obedience of the scriptures. Okay, it says, "Let the wicked forsake his way and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return unto the Lord." All right, letting you know that this is talking about, Israelites, Israelite foreigners. Okay, you can't return to something that you were never a part of. It says, "And he will have mercy upon him, and to our power, for he will abundantly pardon." All right, for he will abundantly pardon. All right, and that this has taken place, um, and will continue to take place. But it all started with the sacrifice of Yahweh Shah Hamashiach, our Lord. All right, his sacrifice is what opened the gates, if you will, to us being able to receive this mercy. Okay, now let's jump up. This is Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 3. It says, "Incline your ear and come unto me. Hear, and your soul shall live, and I will make an everlasting covenant with you, even the sure mercies of David." All right, so right now, we're not under the old covenant. All right, we're under grace, and we are being, we are being guided into this everlasting covenant that this scripture is speaking of. All right, in which really only Yahweh Shah um, is a part of, being that he conquered death. All right, he conquered death and he reigns as an immortal, God, power in the heavens. All right, so let me read this again. It says, "Incline your ear and come unto me. Hear, and your soul shall live." All right, because there's no life under the old covenant. All right, the scriptures say that we've all been concluded. We've all been concluded under sin. Roughly paraphrasing. Okay, so according to the old covenant, according to those old, not old, but the former, law, statutes, and commandments, and all those ordinances and regulations. According to that, we should all be dead. All right, and through the Spirit, we are dead. We are dead. We're alive through the Spirit, of Yahweh Shah, the Spirit of Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shah, man. All right, but we're dead to this world. All right, but let me read this again, and then we're gonna jump into 1 Samuel 21. All right, this is Isaiah 55 and 3. It says, "Incline your ear and come unto me. Hear, and your soul shall live, and I will make an everlasting covenant with you, even the sure mercies of David." All right, now let's get an example of that mercy that David received. Okay, because when you read the scriptures, there's multitude of examples where David received mercy. But I'm just going to get this particular example here in 1 Samuel 21. All right, because this was a token, this was a sign in the spirit, okay, that old covenant was only a shadow of things to come, like it mentions in Hebrews 10. All right, so let's read this real quick. This is 1 Samuel 21 and 1. It says, "Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee?" And David, and when you get the context, David was fleeing. He was fleeing from Saul. All right, he was fleeing from Saul, who was basically afraid of David, jealous of David. Okay, so let's read this again. Psalms 21:1, it says, Then came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Right? So David was using guile. David was using wisdom. All right. And he didn't trust anybody, you know, to really know what was going on, because he knew that, Saul was trying to kill him. Okay. Let's keep reading 1 Samuel 21:3. It says, Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. Right? So David was hungry. He wanted to eat. It says, And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under my hand, but there is hallowed bread. Right? Basically meaning when it says common, it's going into just, regular bread that's, open to the public. All right. It says, But there is hallowed bread, right? Going into basically the show bread. All right. And let's see if there's a cross reference on this. Yep. It cross references Leviticus 24. I'm going to go ahead and read it. This is Leviticus 24:5-9. It says, And thou shalt take fine flour and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2/10 deals shall be in one cake. And thou shalt set them into rows, 6 on a row, upon the pure table of the Lord. And thou shalt put pure frankincense upon each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Right. So this bread that David is getting ready to partake in it's bread. It's holy. All right. It's used for the service of the temple. As we're reading Leviticus 24:8, it says, Every Sabbath he shall set it in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. Okay. Verse 9, it says, And it shall be Aaron's and his sons, and they shall eat it in the holy place, for it is most holy unto him of the offerings of the Lord made by fire, by a perpetual decree. Now, it's the spirit because, according to that, according to the old covenant, the high priesthood was restricted to Aaron and his descendants. But we know under the order of Melchizedek, that has been opened up to, the 12,000 out of each tribe of the elect of Israel. But let's prove that. Let's get that real quick. Okay. This is 1 Peter chapter 2. And let's get verse 4. It says, To whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious. Talking about Yahushua. It says, Ye also as lively stones are a built up spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to the Most High by Yahushua HaMashiach. Right? So there's a new spiritual house. There's a new priesthood. All right. And that priesthood is the order of Melchizedek. And really, it's not new. All right. It's the way that it was always meant to be, through the Spirit. Okay. So David wasn't, David received mercy. All right. David received mercy in this situation. All right. That we're reading about in 1 Samuel 21. And we got to remember how David got into this situation in the first place, which is really by faith. Right. It all stemmed back to the faith that David displayed, during David and Goliath. All right. Everything that David is going through at this point is due to that faith that he displayed. It was a domino effect. All right. So the Lord isn't, the scriptures say the Lord's thoughts are higher than our thoughts and his ways are higher than us. All right. So Yahweh Shem Shai is not restricted, okay, by the very, ordinances in which he is responsible for, providing, creating. All right. You have to think outside the box. You got to think bigger. Okay. When you're reading the scriptures, it's not as simple as just, you know, wearing fringes. Okay, there's a bigger picture, there's a bigger, you know, operation going on that Yahweh Shemel Shai is trying to get us to understand and get us to. All right, but let's go back. This is First Samuel chapter 21 and verse 4. It says, "And the priest answered David and said, there is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hollow bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered the priest and said unto him, of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hollowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord, right? Put hot bread in the day that when it was taken. All right, so David ended up eating the bread. Okay, he ended up eating the bread. All right, and this was, this is an example you can use when you're reading that Isaiah 55 and 3. All right, that's just one example of the sure mercies of David. All right, and that's what we're looking to cleave onto in these times. All right, now, as the scriptures say, we establish the law, right? We keep the laws to the best of our ability. We rehearse the righteous acts. All right, but you're not supposed to be a robot either. We're not supposed to be simple either. All right, we're supposed to be spiritual. All right, and as we progress further along in prophecy, all right, we're going to have to be more spiritual. All right, we can't be simple. All right, you're going to have some spiritual wherewithal about yourself in this thing. All right, and what do the scriptures say? The Lord is looking for faith. The Lord is looking for faith, man. So let's get a couple more precepts. All right, this is James chapter 2 and verse 10. It says, for whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point is guilty of all. All right, and that's why the scriptures say our righteousness is but filthy rags. All right, here we are in Babylon the Great. All right, everything around us is defiled. Everything, the clothes, the food, the air, the water, okay, the relationships, your job, everything is defiled. Everything is filthy. Everything is one way or another tied unto wickedness. Okay, so there is no justifying yourself according to that old standard. Okay, the only justification that we're going to receive is through faith in Yahweh. All right, but let's prove that real quick. Let's get that. Let's prove that. This is Romans chapter 8, and let's get verse 26. It says, our victory in Hamashiach. It says, likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities. All right, and we get victory through Hamashiach because his sacrifice gave us this grace period. It covered all these things that we are not able to, fulfill in these times today. All right, Romans 8 and 26. It says, likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And he that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of the Most High. All right. So Yahweh Shemel Shai is searching your mind, your heart, through the Spirit. All right. And he knows that he put us in this situation. All right. So he's not, the Lord is not a man that he should lie, man. The Lord put us in this situation, and he told us that he was going to be looking for faith and works. Okay. Faith and works. All right. That's the formula. That's the recipe right there. All right, which is really, teaching. Okay, offering your body a living sacrifice, being available to the brotherhood. Sacrificing your life on this side. That's the faith and the works that Yahweh Shemel Shah is looking for, man. Okay, this is verse 28. It says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love Yahweh Shemel Shah, to them who are called according to his purpose, for whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his son, that he might be firstborn among many brethren. And this is the point in verse 30. It says, moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called. And whom he called, them he also justified. And whom he justified, them he also glorified. All right. So our justification doesn't come through, all right, going tit for tat in the law. Okay. Our justification is also ultimately due to predestination. All right. Grace and mercy. All right. Let's get this word justified. Because if you need to be justified, that means that there's something that you did wrong, that something you technically did wrong that you have to explain. Okay, that word justify right there lets you know that this thing is based off of mercy. Right? When you get this word, let's get it. It says
Strong's G 1344. Dikaiao. Dikaiao.
It says to render righteous such or such he ought to be, to show, to exhibit, to in events. Okay, let's look up this word, events. Reveal the presence of, right? To reveal, right? It says, and that's the thing. If you only have to reveal something that's hidden, like again, faith is is about to be revealed. All right. It says to show, to exhibit. It says one to be righteous, such as he is, and wishes himself to be considered. Right. We're hoping that we're considered, of the elect. All right. It says to declare, to pronounce, to just or innocent. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there. Lord's willing, this lesson was edifying. With that, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Shem Shah, Bashem Kakadash. Shalom.